Donald Trump flipped 6 states in the 2024 election. What's next for 2028? In this video, we'll take a closer look at 5 more states that the Republican Party can target in 2028. Donald Trump, the former and future president, has completely changed the electoral landscape. Not only did he hold on to North Carolina, which he won in 2020, but he also flipped 6 additional states. These states include Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, all of which switched from Biden in 2020 to Trump in 2024. However, Trump and the GOP also made impressive gains in other states where they didn't flip, but the margin of victory for Democrats shrank significantly. Just look at New Jersey, for example. In 2020, Joe Biden carried it by 16%, but 4 years later he only won by 6%. That's a 10-point swing in favor of Trump in just 4 years. Now, we'll explore the top 5 states that Republicans can win in 2028 that they didn't win in 2024. This could add to Trump's incredible 312 electoral vote victory, which is a modern-day landslide. Let's start with New Mexico, a state worth 5 electoral votes. This state hasn't voted red since 2004, when George W. Bush won it by less than 1%. Barack Obama flipped it in 2008, and it has been blue ever since. However, even though Biden carried the state by 11 points in 2020, Kamala Harris won it by just half that margin in 2024, defeating Trump by only 6 points. As Democrats continue to struggle with Hispanic voters, we're seeing their coalition start to break down in New Mexico, the only state in the country with a Hispanic majority electorate. Cities like Albuquerque and Santa Fe simply weren't as liberal as they were when Biden was at the top of the Democratic ticket. Kamala Harris's performance was notably weaker than expected. Even though she did well in Colorado, her margin only decreased by 2 points compared to Biden's performance from 2020. In New Mexico, her performance was pretty disappointing. It was called much later than expected. Over the last few years, New Mexico has been shifting rightward. Barack Obama won it by 15 points in 2008, but by 2012, that margin had dropped to 10 points. With Clinton on the ballot, it went down again to 8 points. Joe Biden improved it slightly to 11 in 2020, but now in 2024, New Mexico is barely a likely blue state, and is definitely within reach for a Republican like J.D. Vance in 2028. So I have it as the top contender for Republicans to flip in the next election, placing it in the tilt Republican category. At number 4, we have New Jersey, which I mentioned earlier. The Democrats' performance here was terrible in 2024. It couldn't have been worse for Kamala Harris. New York also took a significant shift toward the right. Trump lost it by 23 points to Joe Biden in 2020, but against Kamala Harris, he lost by just 12. This entire region shifted to the right, much like the rest of the country. Just look at what's happened here. The only truly blue area is in the Atlanta region of Georgia. Everywhere else across the map, whether it's the East Coast, West Coast, or South, every single county essentially shifted to the right, with only a few exceptions. In the tri-state area, we see significant shifts. The Bronx is now 22% more Republican, and Queens is 21% more Republican. These were some of the most liberal regions in the entire country, where Democrats used to win by 60-point margins, and now they're down to just 20 and 30 points. New Jersey was dragged along with New York in favor of Trump. A state that was solid blue just one election cycle ago is now one of the most competitive races in the entire country. New Jersey will definitely be one to watch in 4 years, and it's on the list as a potential flip for the Republicans. I'm also placing it in the tilt red category. Moving on to number 3, we have the Commonwealth of Virginia. This state has voted for Democrats in the last 5 presidential elections. Obama in 2008 and 2012, Hillary Clinton in 2016, and Biden in 2020. Who won by a double-digit margin, which was quite impressive. It was stronger than Obama's 6-point margin from 2008. However, in 2024, Kamala Harris really lowered the bar for Democrats. She won Virginia by 6%. This is a winnable state for Republicans, especially after the success we saw with Glenn Youngkin in 2021. He was elected as the Republican governor, marking the first time a Republican won a major statewide office in Virginia in over a decade. If he is anywhere near the ticket in 2028, Republicans will have a very good chance at finally winning Virginia on the presidential level. In 2028, it would be the first time in 24 years that a Republican carried the state, with George W. Bush being the last to do so. The biggest shift in 2024 came in Northern Virginia, particularly in the Alexandria region, which is right under Washington, D.C. This area has been a key reason why Virginia has leaned Democratic, while the rural parts of the state tend to trend Republican. So, Virginia is definitely winnable for the GOP in 2028. Even if they don't win it, it will be recognized as one of the most competitive states in the country. It wasn't seen that way in 2020 or 2024, but in 2028, it certainly will be, especially given how competitive it was with Kamala Harris in 2024. Therefore, I'm placing Virginia in the tilt Republican category as well. 4. New Hampshire. Now we're left with just the top 2 states. Republicans are already at 344 electoral votes after Trump's victory in 2024. Democrats are in a tough spot, arguably the worst they've been since the Reagan era. When Bush won in 2000 and 2004, those were still close elections. Democrats definitely have the opportunity to bounce back, as they did in 2008, and they also won in 2012. In 2016, it was a crushing blow for Republicans, but they felt confident heading into 2020. Joe Biden won the election, but now in 2024, Trump won the popular vote, something that hasn't happened for a Republican since George W. Bush in 2004. Today, the electoral map looks very different than it did just 2 months ago. Before the election, nobody thought New Hampshire would even be that competitive, but it is now the second most likely flip on our list. New Hampshire has gone red since 2000, with George W. Bush being the last Republican to win it. He lost it 4 years later to John Kerry in 2004. However, looking at New Hampshire as a whole, it was pretty blue during the Biden era when he won it by 7.4%. Jeanne Shaheen was easily elected to the Senate, as was Maggie Hassan in 2022. But 4 years later, New Hampshire became incredibly competitive, with Kamala Harris winning by just 3%. While that margin isn't as narrow as Clinton's victory in 2016, when she won by less than half a percentage point, Harris's performance here was notably worse. Joe Biden won nearly every single county, but Kamala Harris's performance was weaker. New Hampshire is the second most likely flip for Republicans, and it's definitely a state they can win if they invest enough resources into it. However, with its 4 electoral votes, it's not the most appealing prospect. Nevertheless, New Hampshire will become one of the most competitive races in 2028. Just look at the margin, 3%. It was more competitive than states like Arizona and Nevada, which were considered among the closest. So I see New Hampshire leaning Republican, with the GOP having the opportunity to win the state by just over 1%. 5. Minnesota. Finally, we arrive at the most likely flip for Republicans in the next election. Minnesota. This is surprising as it is the state with the longest Democratic voting streak. It hasn't gone red since 1972 when Richard Nixon was re-elected. Every single Republican, including Ronald Reagan, has lost Minnesota since then, including Trump, who lost it by 4% to Kamala Harris in 2024. You might wonder why I've placed Minnesota ahead of New Hampshire on this list, especially since Trump only lost New Hampshire by 3 points. The main reason is that Kamala Harris had every reason to win Minnesota by a larger margin. She was expected to perform better than Joe Biden, who won Minnesota by 7 points in 2020. However, even with the state's governor, Tim Walz, on the ticket, she barely won the state, pulling off just a 4% margin of victory. This is arguably a weaker victory than her performance in New Hampshire. I believe Minnesota will also lean Republican, just like New Hampshire. I see whoever the Republican nominee is being able to win the state by at least 1%. This scenario could lead to a best-case outcome for Republicans. In this case, Arizona would likely be red, as would Nevada and Pennsylvania too, could be in play. David McCormick won the Senate seat there, unseating incumbent Bob Casey, which was a huge win for the GOP. If Republicans can capitalize on these trends, they could reach a staggering 358 electoral votes, resulting in an utter landslide victory. This would be the largest win for any candidate of any party since Obama's 365 electoral vote victory back in 2008. Given how polarized the country is compared to where it was in 2008, this would arguably be an even more impressive victory. So there you have it. The top 5 most likely flips for Republicans in 2028 are New Mexico, New Jersey, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Minnesota, totaling 46 electoral votes that could be added to Trump's 312. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content just like this.